but we can move on now to the effects of an exercise program on mental health, mental well-being of veterinary students. So that's being delivered by Mr. Fergus Mitchell, who is a fourth-year student at the University of Nottingham, and as part of his undergraduate degree, researched into how regular exercise can have an effect on veterinary students' mental health and well-being. Fergus's work was inspired by the results of the Vet Fit study, and as a strong advocate for bettering mental health within universities and the wider professions, he enjoyed undertaking the research. So over to you, Fergus.
Perfect, thank you. So yes, as Mandy said, I'm going to talk about my undergraduate research at the University of Nottingham. We're looking at the effects of an exercise programme on the mental wellbeing of veterinary students, and it's more sort of looking at the coping strategies. Obviously, there's been a lot of chat today about poor mental wellbeing, poor mental health, and I think what was nice about this opportunity for me was I could have a look at some of the coping strategies that help students, in fact. I'll probably gloss over this slide a little bit because obviously we've heard a lot today about mental health and wellbeing within our profession, especially some sort of stark figures from Rory earlier. However, I thought I'd add them in as well, just so we know why we're here, I suppose. And then these two headings really highlight the prevalence of systemically poor mental wellbeing throughout the profession for me. They're from two separate papers when I was analysing literature, and both of these quotes stuck with me. And then at the same time, I also came across this article in the Horse and Hound magazine, and it just reiterated to me that it was a very well-known about problem, and it's not something that we should shy away from or keep behind closed doors. Obviously, this was back in 2020 now, and I'm sure there's been plenty more published since, but I just thought I'd add it in there. So before we go on, I don't want to come across as patronizing towards anyone. However, I think it's good just to have a basic sort of understanding of why exercise is really good for us. We hear it bandied around the media a lot. Obviously it's been amplified with COVID, but I thought I'd put up a few reasons according to Mind as to why exercise is good for us. So it reduces risk of stress, anxiety and depression, boosting mood, better self-esteem, connection with people, which is something I'll touch on a little bit later and was really important from my research, better sleep, but obviously these points aren't applicable to everyone and everyone sort of has their different reasons for doing things, but I thought I'd put that in there. So I was sort of probably pause, although we are a little bit time pressed, so how much do you exercise is a question I'd really like to pose to you, and hopefully if we're in a room together, we get various different answers. But the reason I ask this is because the NHS recommend that adults should do at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week, or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity a week. With this in mind, sort of consider how much you exercise. There's no right and wrong answer. However, there is this quote from Dr. Nick Cavill, who is an independent consultant specialising in public health and health improvement. And he says, if exercise were a pill, it would be one of the most cost-effective drugs ever invented. And quite timely, I think yesterday there was some new published guidance with regards to depression from the government. And I think it mentions sort of preventions before the use of medication, and exercise was certainly up there on the little snippet I saw, but I think we'll have to watch this space. Finally, here's the aims of what my dissertation was about, sort of slightly more detailed, but to investigate the effects of an 8-week exercise programme on the mental wellbeing of first-year female University of Nottingham vet students. So just to be clear, obviously my programme is not the first exercise programme that's been used on veterinary students or students in other medical professions. So there's a Medwell programme at the University of Limerick. And then interestingly, in South Africa, they looked at the effects of an exercise program on the PDing accuracy of vet students. A side conclusion from the study was that exercise did also improve the mental health and wellbeing of students that participated. And finally, I've highlighted the Vet Fit study here. I'm sure lots of people probably know about Vet Fit or have seen it at perhaps London Vet Show. or on Instagram, etc. So these guys, Charlie and Andy, were really the inspiration for my study. They came to Nottingham and did a little talk, and they really were the inspiration for what I carried out. And it's kind of to sort of back them up a little bit. So thank you to VetFit. So I'll run you through a few of the program details and participation criteria. So there's an 8-week program that started in January 2020, pre-pandemic, believe it or not, and finished actually just before the pandemic started off. Our criteria was University of Nottingham first year female vet students, and they had to be self-perceived non-exercisers. So they had to not fit into that criteria that the NHS had suggested of exercise. And they also had to not own a gym membership to sort of make sure that we know they weren't bluffing as such, and that they were non-exercisers. Further details was that it was an 8-week program. We had 12 participants join us, which was great. So we gave them 3 sessions per week, all free of charge. 1 high intensity interval training session, which was kindly run by the same fitness coach each week. We had an introduction to sports session, which was run by sports societies at the university. So, for example, we had netball, we had rugby, we had football, we had badminton, and it was just to give the participants a taste of team sport. Nothing too advanced, but as you can see in this photo, sort of a bit of a kick around on the ashtray. And then we also had a stretching session, normally towards the end of the week, run by myself and another couple of volunteers. Unfortunately, we had 2 cancelled due to COVID towards the end, but we're fortunate to get the rest in. So in terms of data collection, we gave the participants 3 questionnaires. So we gave them 1 before the programme, 1 halfway through, and 1 after the programme. And each of the questionnaires included a 14-item Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale. So this is the scale on this slide here, and you can see that all of the terms are positively worded. And it gives people an opportunity to sort of rate their mental well-being. It's been used within our profession, and it's been used for lots of projects, programs, and policies which aim to improve mental well-being. And then each also included 3 response questions written by myself and my supervisor in order just to gauge how the participants viewed the programme and their own mental well-being. And then finally, in questionnaires 2 and questionnaire 3, we included 5-point like-it scale surveys. The idea of this was to quickly assess participants' views on different parts of the programme, so what they expected and why they're continuing to do the programme. So in terms of data analysis, we focus on the changes of individuals' Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale from the first questionnaire to the last. So the maximum score you can get representing really excellent positive wellbeing would be a 70, and obviously the minimum score representing poor wellbeing would be 14, sorry, so 1 on each of these 14 items. And according to the user grid for the Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale, because we're focusing on individual changes in score rather than the whole population, then any changes of 3 to 7 points are possibly meaningful, and changes of 8 or more are unequivocally meaningful. So that was a good way to go about it for us. Unfortunately, due to the small sample size of only having 12 participants, we couldn't carry out any statistical tests on the population. However, we did look at individual changes. And then we converted the like-it scale survey responses into stat graphs just to visualize the results a bit easier. And then so we took the 3 response questions, and they were thematically analysed by myself, and then they're also co-analysed by my supervisor. And we used the Brown and Clark method of 2006, looking at a reflexive approach. So first, I'd like to run through the results from the Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale. So 5 students had an unequivocally meaningful positive wellbeing change, which was really, really good for us to see. 2 students had a possible meaningful wellbeing change. 3 students had no meaningful wellbeing change, and 1 person had a possibly negative wellbeing change. Sadly, 1 participant didn't fill out the final questionnaire, so you may notice we only have 11 scores here. And on the graph on the right, although I mentioned that we didn't analyze the group statistically, it's just a graph to show how the wellbeing changes have changed over the 3 questionnaires. So these next slides have the responses to the Likert scale survey. So this first one focused on motivation, so why the students initially signed up and continued to participate in the programme. So I've highlighted the fact that participants enjoyed spending time with each other. And actually 22 out of the 23 responses across the 2 questionnaires agreed or strongly agreed to enjoying the programme. And this was, again, really positive for us because that's what we wanted it to be. We wanted it to be an enjoyable process. This Likert scale was just in the final questionnaire only, and it focused on how the programme fared in comparison to the students' expectations of the programme. So I've highlighted 2 components which exceeded the students' expectations the most. These were the quality of the introduction to sport sessions and the quality of the HIT sessions. And so we believe that this will be useful if similar projects were to be carried out at Nottingham, and just general feedback on what did work and what didn't work. You also notice that we had up here, we had a life coaching session too. And the idea behind this was to give the participants an opportunity to reflect on the programme at approximately week 6 of 8, and just to look towards the future too. So finally, this is the last Likert scale survey, and this was also in the final questionnaire and focused on the impact of the programme on the participants, asking quite direct questions. Again, like I mentioned earlier, we're 1 participant down filling out the questionnaire. However, we're really pleased to see that 11 felt that the programme had a positive effect on their well-being. And the bottom one was very interesting as well, saying my social life improved, because that was something that was really important. I'll touch on a little bit in a minute. Okay, so next we have the reflexive thematic analysis, to which we drew 4 overarching themes, and from them have 14 sub-themes which fitted into the themes. I won't read out all of the themes and sub-themes here, but there was a complete range of answers, and this was something that was really important to us because it gave us more depth to the participants' responses in the Likert scale surveys and the wellbeing changes. So a few things that were really important to us was awareness of mental well-being, and this sort of related to the fact that participants showed a strong sense of awareness of their mental well-being as a concept and being aware of their own situation, both positively and negatively. Secondly, sense of community. So this sort of backing up my point earlier from the Likert scales, we saw that the students felt an obligation towards themselves and towards each other and enjoyed the fun and social aspect of the programme. This is something that I probably underestimated before the programme started, and how much community can actually benefit mental well-being. Thirdly, and quite importantly, because obviously it's an exercise programme, it was this appreciation of the importance of exercise. It gave them good structure, it gave them motivation to be fit, sort of looking at a healthier work-life balance, which was great. And then obviously we had some suggestions for improvement, which again would add if anyone was to do a similar study. Here's some quotations. I'll get them all up, and they were just this is just to give you a snapshot of how responses fitted under each theme. I won't read them all out for you, however they're there. I'm a little bit time conscious as well, so I think I'll move on. So this leads me to our to the 4 conclusions that I drew from the quantitative and qualitative data and the study as a whole. Firstly, exercise programs have a positive effect on mental well-being. This is, I suppose, quite a big generalization, but I think in our case it rung very true. I appreciate that there would have been contributing factors to participants' mental well-being over the course of the program, not to mention that we were heading towards, I suppose, what no one really knew what we're heading towards, but we're getting close to COVID and it was on the news, etc. However, it was also a great shame because since last March, or March 2020, there's not been, we're hoping to do some follow-up questionnaires and studies, and COVID slightly thwarted that. Secondly, community matters. I think it is really, really important. And whether it's exercise or whether it's vet school or working in practice or any other walk of life, community is really important. I think it's something that came as a side product of this program, that all these participants had something in common and really enjoyed each other's company, taking part in the program, and made some really, really close friendships, which I think was great. Thirdly, participation's expectations were exceeded. This was great to see because we didn't quite know how it would go down, especially taking people who perceive themselves as non-exercisers. So it was really great to see that their expectations were exceeded with the program. And finally, veterinary students still struggle, and I know that no one will probably disagree with that. But even at the end of the program, we still were hearing of stresses and issues, and students giving us reasons to believe that there's lots to improve within the veterinary profession and within everyone's perception of mental health and well-being. So I think it's really important, obviously, that we don't stop now. Excuse me. So I'd like to acknowledge a few people, most importantly, Georgina and Sabine, my supervisor and co-supervisor, for all their help. A huge thank you to the MMI team for their help with my project, and obviously for this opportunity today. And then a few other people who were really, really instrumental in the running of the program. Here are my references for anyone that's interested. And that should be it. Thank you for listening.